what is dry farming? In its simplest terms, it's growing of grapes or crop without any water. But that isn't really a complete story. It's really just like organic farming. It's what you can do, not what you can't do. I like to say that dry farming is a verb, not a noun. It's all the activities that you do to store the winter rains in your ground and allow them to become accessible to the grapevine during the growing season. Hi, my name's Frank Leeds. I'm Vice President of Vineyards at Frogs Leap Winery. We're at my family's historic ranch on the west side of Rutherford. This ranch has been planted in grapevines since the 1880s, always dry farmed, always organically farmed. So I've been farming here since the mid-1980s. I was taught to dry farm and to farm from my uncle Roy Chevet, and he was taught how to dry farm from the pre-Prohibition grape growers that established Napa Valley. When we converted to organics, when we certified organically, it was really the dry farmers, the old dry farm grape growers that were very easy to convert. The dry farming and organics just go hand in hand. So the Europeans brought the concept of dry farming to Napa Valley, and for the first 100 years, everything in Napa Valley was dry farmed. It wasn't until the advent of drip irrigation in the 1970s that dry farming began to not be used as much here in Napa. The wines from the Judgment of Paris, at least all the red wines, were all dry farmed, and still many growers up here in Napa use dry farming techniques. At Frogs Leap Winery, it is the basis of how we grow our vines, along with organic growing techniques. So all our vineyards, whether they're on the bench lands, on the valley floor, or up on the sloping hills that come out of the Mayacamas Range, are all dry farmed. Why do we dry farm? The most important thing is that, for me, is the health of our vineyards. The average age of a vine in Napa Valley before it's removed is 17 years. Our vines average 30 years, and many are in the 40 to 60 year range. So you get a long-lived vine with dry farming. The second reason would be the quality of the grapes. We get physiologically ripe grapes with proper acid levels at traditional sugars in the 23 to 23 and a half, maybe 24 range. We don't have to do a lot of hang time to allow the grapes to develop. The other really important thing, I think, is terroir, which is the sense of place. And nothing shows off a vineyard's terroir like a dry farm grapevine. It's big root system plunging into the soil, pulling all the nutrients naturally, pulling the amount of water that was given to it that year out of the ground, really showcases the terroir of a site. And probably the fourth reason, and you're not going to hear this in California in the 21st century very often, is tradition. We've always dry farmed. So how do we dry farm in the north coast valleys of California? Well, the first thing is we try to get the ground to work like a sponge and store all that winter's moisture that we get for the growing season. And though some might think that the water comes at the wrong time for this, it actually comes at the perfect time. We don't have to worry about water during the growing season and all the rain during the growing season and all the problems that causes a lot of growers as far as fungus and mildew. The vines are able to get their roots down in that nice soils and pull that moisture out all through the growing season. The growing season, as far as I'm concerned, starts right after harvest, and that's when we need to prep our dry farm vineyards so they can be receptive to the winter rains. So we spread compost, we plant big cover crops, green manure cover crops, rip any soils that we think are getting any hard pan, any shallower soils, and get those soils in the perfect condition to act like a sponge and hold all the moisture that we need. We're very lucky here in Napa. We get an average of 35 inches of rain a year. Dry farm, for a full crop, we need 18. This year we didn't get 18, we only got 12. So our crops, just like a lot of all the irrigated crops out there also, we're not going to have a bumper crop this year. But we're going to have a respectable crop of high quality grapes. On a usual year, we will outperform the Napa Valley average. Our red grape production and our white grape production, it will be higher than Napa Valley average. And I expect this year that our productions will be at least equal to, if not above, irrigated grapevines in Napa County. It's springtime. We've got these beautiful cover crops. We've had, hopefully, at least 18 inches of rain. My sweet spot is mid to upper 20s. And then, when the soil is friable, when it's right to work, when you don't puddle it by going in with your implements, or it's not too dry, we get to work in the vineyards. And the first thing we do is mow. Then we immediately get in there and disc that cover crop into the ground, getting all that nitrogen, and we don't let the cover crop dry out on the surface. As soon as we've got it disked once, we go in with a hoe plow. Or a French plow. And this is a plow that goes in and out around the vines hydraulically and removes the dirt from around the vine. Then we'll disc one more time to flatten it out, and then we begin working with our cultivators. And we will cultivate a vineyard every couple of weeks. Young vineyard maybe every week to keep it rolling. A good cultivation is worth 2 irrigations. And this was told to me by my old uncle. And I was talking with a young woman who is now French, who is now running one of the big estates here in Napa. And I was talking with her, and she said that's what they teach her, and that's what was taught to her in soils classes in France. So, though it's not taught in this country, it's well known in Europe that there's nothing better than a good cultivation to get those vines going. So we usually stop our cultivation at about veraison, when the vines, the red grapes turn color, when the whites start to soften. On a hot year or a drought year, we may add another cultivation in if we hit a hot spell. But other than that, we're pretty much done with all our groundwork by the start of July. When you plant a vineyard to be dry farm, it's very important that you give the vine enough room that there'll be enough moisture and nutrients in the soil. And the magic number here in Napa is about 50 square feet. So the old timers would plant 7 by 7. We'll plant 9 by 6, 8 by 7, but something that gives you at least 50 square feet. If the soil's a little poor, well then you open up the spacing a little bit. 10-7, 10-8, 9-8. But you need to give the vine enough room to compete, to not have to compete with its neighbors for nutrients. You can really see in a drought year, you go around the valley, and it's not just dry farm vineyards, it's irrigated vineyards. Boy, the end vines are looking pretty good this year in comparison to a lot of the other vines out there. And that's because they have more room. So you get the vineyard spaced correctly. And you want it spaced well so that you can do your cultivation, do your hoe plowing, so you can mechanically work it. None of these dry farm vineyards are herbicided. These are all cultivated, right? There's no chemical mowing in dry farming. So we always plant a dormant rootstock. And I think this is very important. Not a bench graft, not a green grower, not something that needs a lot of moisture to keep it alive and going. you want that grapevine, that rootstock, to go down and find the moisture. So when we plant, we usually will plant in May is the perfect time. Start of June, we will not plant any really after the mid-June. We want that vine to have some sort of natural moisture there in the soil. We will water these vines usually, if they're planted late April, start of May, mid-May, they'll get their first irrigation about the 10th, the second week of June. We will dig a hole, a little bowl around the vine, and fill it with 5 gallons of water. At Frogs Leap, we use water carts to do this. My daughter, though, has established vineyards using drip lines, but it's the same idea. You get that little hole open, you put the water in it, and then you immediately cover it back up so it doesn't evaporate, it doesn't crack. And that will help drive that rootstock down. Then you keep cultivating it every week, 10 days, and then usually right about the start of August, you'll give it its second irrigation. And almost all years, we're able to run with just 2 irrigations. This year, we watered a little bit earlier, and we actually added a 3rd irrigation. But we only got 12 inches of rain up here this year, so we're in kind of uncharted territory. We haven't had this little rain since 76, 77. Most years, it's just 2 irrigations. Then the second year, we give it 1 irrigation, usually in June. And when we come back in August, only the stragglers, any vines that are straggling behind, will get that second irrigation. And the 3rd year, it's really just the stragglers, and then after that, it's just if vines have been replanted. In a properly done vineyard, there's very little irrigating the 3rd time. There's very little irrigating in that second pass in the 2nd year. And it's very important when these vines are little, and why I really like to use just rootstock, is you want the vine to grow like a bush. You want it to be vigorous. You don't want to try to trim off the vegetative growth and try to train it. You want it to grow like a little bush that first year. And the 2nd year, you've got to be careful just to run it up, but top it, but let it bush out. It's really important to let these vines grow like a bush at first. I'm standing right now in a vineyard that was planted in 2018 with these exact techniques. So as you can see, there's no drip line. These vines have not received any water. It's the 2nd week of September. They're sitting at 25 sugar, ready to fit it. They're in the rotation to get picked starting next week. With the hot spell we just went through, we're a little behind. We're busy picking Zinfandel, which was not running no quicker than normal this year, but the Cabernet is starting to jump on us, so this is ready to go. Go for a walk here and see we're walking in ground that was cultivated during the last hot spell about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. You see this little diamond pattern is the roll and pack that tamps the grout down and gives us a nice dust mulch. What we're trying to do is, with the cultivating, is to not only pull the moisture up, break down any organic matter and to make it available for the vines, and then to put a nice dust mulch on the top so that the water doesn't evaporate, the moisture doesn't evaporate. We had some thunderstorms that went through last night. We only got 1/10 of an inch of rain, but you see that the soil should be a lighter color than it is right now. It looks like it just been rained on. This is one pass with the hoe plow. There's been no shovel work here at all. The only places we'll use shovel on our ranches are around the end post and the last vine, because the hoe plow won't pop in quick enough. Now, one thing I did not mention was when we hoe plow, we do not push the soil back into the vine row. We usually wait until about the middle of May, when we think the last of the spring rains have passed, and then we will push the soil back into the vine row, and that will smother any weeds that have started up and give us this nice, clean vineyard. So Here's an organic vineyard that's a lot cleaner than a lot of your mowed and herbicided. Here is a 32-year-old Cabernet vineyard. This vineyard was planted 5 by 10, so we got exactly 50 square feet. It's on SO4 rootstock, which is not a drought-resistant rootstock, so they'll tell you. And it was slow to establish. This vineyard did not look like the one we just walked through. This vineyard took about 6 years to look like that vineyard over there. And but this always produces high-quality fruit. It's sitting at, again, close to 25 sugar. I think it was 24.5 last time we were out here. And it's an interesting stock that you don't get the basils yellowing when they sugar up like St. George or 110R, and it's doesn't quite put as much growth on, but it's been very fruitful, very healthy vineyard, and totally adaptable to dry farming in this area. When I first planted this vineyard 35 years ago, I planted mostly St. George, but I did take 5 acres and put in 3.5 of this SO4 and another acre of 110R. And I gotta say, in this spot in the ranch, this SO4 does very, very nicely. Okay, so the question is you get less crop with dry farmed. I've heard that all the time, and it's just not true. In Napa County, every year, we produce more tons of grapes per acre than the Napa Valley average. I'm not saying we produce more tons of grapes than every irrigated vineyard out there. I'm just saying that if you take the Napa Valley average and you take what we produce, we get over that bar every year, both red and white. And really in Napa County, it's all about quality. And quality and high tonnage really don't go hand in hand. There is a limit depending on the sites. In our benchland vineyards, we have a self-imposed limit of 4 tons the acre on our Cabernet grapes. And you're just gonna start to lose the quality if you try to overcrop these things. So you will get a nice big healthy grapevine. When you go around and look at our Frogs Leap Vineyards, we have nice big strong grapevines. We don't have little struggling grapevines, which is a big misconception. Remember, dry farming's a verb. You can certainly dry farm and not get any grapes. I've seen guys irrigate and not get any grapes around here. So that's a misconception in the North Coast valleys. Somehow there's this conception that tillage is not good for the climate. And yet these same guys that'll tell you this end up herbiciding all the ground around their non-tilled strips and then pouring water on it, which we don't have in California. So I made a little cheat sheet here of the benefits of tillage. Tillage improves the structure of the land by fining the soil and therefore providing greater feeding surface to the roots, by increasing the depth of the soil and therefore giving greater foraging and rooting area to the plant, by warming and drying the soil in the spring, by reducing extremes of temperature and moisture, and by supplying air to the roots. Tillage saves moisture by increasing the water holding capacity of the soil, by checking evaporation. Tillage helps the fertilization of plants by aiding in setting free plant nutrients, by promoting nitrification, by hastening the decomposition of organic matter, by extending the 3 above to greater depths of the soil. Tillage indirectly protects the vineyard by destroying weeds, by destroying insect pests and breaking up their breeding places, by reducing plant diseases and the removal of host plants, bearing of infected leaves, fruit mummies, etc., by driving the roots down and out of the favorite zone of phylloxera and nematodes, by omitting or lessening the need for some irrigation and therefore reducing associated fungal problems such as oak root fungus, and by driving out mice, rabbits, gophers, and other pests. So there you go. There's a short list on tillage. I'm sure I missed something. The thing we do with tillage is trying to catch that moisture before it drops away from the surface of the ground, the surface of the soil. So by opening up the ground and letting it start to evaporate by capillary action, much like a wick on a candle or a lamp, it will start to pull the moisture up. So you'll dry out the wetter areas, you'll keep the moisture up in the drier areas, you'll kind of even out your vineyard. Then, once you get the moisture going, and my wife will laugh, she'll come out and look at me in the vineyard in the spring, and after I get done working the ground, as the sun starts to go down, you can just see the ground almost looks like I turned on the sprinklers. It almost looks moist. Then, once you get it so it's working and it's pulling up the moisture from below, you go in and seal it by putting on a dust mulch. And that dust mulch then will, now that you've got your 4 feet or 5 feet of soil filled with moisture, you put that dust mulch on it, and that'll stop further evaporation. If you get these riparian-based rootstocks that have been irrigated for years, you will end up with a root system that's right up on the top and a mass of roots under the drip line. And these are very, very hard vineyards to convert to dry farming. If it's a rupestris stock and it naturally wants to go down, then that's you're having an easier time of it. If it's 110R, if it's St. George, it's 1103 Paulson, one of these stocks, much, much easier to convert. You can, if you start when they're young, just like that SO4 vineyard we looked at, you can train riparian stocks to go down, but not very, very difficult once they've been on the drip line. The biggest driving cost in vineyards is distance between the row. And the reason for that is the less distance you have between the row, the more passes you need to make. You start planting 7 foot, 6 foot row width vineyards, you're going to spend a ton of money. You start planting vine counts that go over 1,000 per acre, you're going to spend a lot of money. And you're not going to be able to dry farm. So the limit on a dry farm vineyard in the Napa area, in most soils, is about 870, something like that, because you need that 50 square feet. Now, as far as handwork, there's no more handwork in dry farm vineyard. So, I mean, what are we really talking about cost saving wise? I'm not even going to go there with herbicide. I think you'll find out, even if there's not enough moisture in your vineyard to 100% dry farm, you will use less moisture, you're going to have a bigger, healthier root system, and you'll have longer lived grapevines.